Welcome back to the class, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the conquest characters. This is going to be a little bit more about roster building too, because the way that they're currently laid out, you don't, like any other character or legendary, you don't necessarily have to pick like one specific path to go on. However, you still have to set aside a certain amount of resources for when you get this character, assuming you have the team to build them up. You also have to build the team up in some fashion to be able to use the character, as well as maybe there is a little piece of, let's say you have access to Proving Grounds, which is a whole fun thing within itself, but you don't have all the teams to beat all the things that are there, and you're trying to figure out which one you're supposed to be using. So that being said, we've made a list here of who is the most relevant as a Conquest Unlock character or Proving Grounds Unlock character, and who is the least. So without further ado, let's get started. So first off, and you can probably tell which end we're immediately starting, and just number one by the character, but also by the fact of what I've done with the character, it's going to be a Boba Fett Scion of Django. As far as bad conquest characters, he really takes the cake, and he might, in my opinion, and you can probably see this by the way I've geared my conquest characters, he is just borderline unusable outside of TW. And that's really where I have a big issue with him. He doesn't necessarily need to be amazing in GAC, but his big issue is even among the bounty hunter faction that when you go into GAC to use, he's not in any ideal team. And there's a lot of people that I've talked to that will put him, and he can work here, as a fifth in some of these scoundrel like Dash or BAM teams where he can function well. He has a place, but at the end of the day, he's not any more useful than Dengar is. Like, he has an AoE that consistently goes off, that gets damages out, for example, so they can give turn meter for either Dash or for BAM. But I mean, like, Nest does that, IG-88 does that, Candor's Order does that, and these aren't conquest characters that you might put an Omicron on. But so overall, his viability is really low, and I do have to say he has a ton of viability in Territory Wars. He's one of the most consistent counters to Lord Vader. With and without Datacron, he still has kind of a fight, but even then, you have to build up a very specific team, very specific mods. He doesn't get to beat a slew of things out there just by existing. Like, we were able to take him down in TW defense with CLS. Like, that's not... He seems to be too niche and too limited to one game mode, and we're not going to talk about Starkiller because he's not a conquest character, but one thing that they really should have done with Scion of Django is they should have given him a Juhani. Starkiller was specifically meant for GAC, that's where he really shines, but CG decided to, throw out a completely random character with another Omicron you can put on the Starkiller team that makes it really good in Territory Wars. And that's really what they should have done with Boba Fett. We should have gotten another bounty hunter, another scoundrel, even could have been an old one that has a GAC Omicron that really brings his team together and makes him better than just a filler character to go with BAM as far as his overall team goes. So last place is going to be Boba Fett, and yeah, it's more of a negative review. He has very limited use and very limited modes. Next up is going to be Swallow. Take this with a grain of salt, this is going to be a pretty hot take. And this doesn't mean that Swallow was bad. I believe he's very good, actually. I don't regret anything that I've done with him. The Relic level, the Zeta, the Omicron, etc., the mods. I think he's a very good character. But when you compare him side by side, I think, with the rest of the Conquest characters that we currently have in game, he just comes in here because what he's doing for his team, being Rey or JTR, is less than, say, Maul or Malgus or Cat is doing for their teams. He doesn't just revolutionize the Rey team and automatically make all the things that used to beat it before, some of them still beat it. And all the teams that Rey could beat before, there's only been a few more added to the list. The most notable is that he really kind of hands JMK's butt to him now, and that's very nice, especially for Rey on offense. But at the same time, the Lord Vader counter didn't change at all. The Starkiller counter looks like it's still very possible. It's still doable. It's a little trickier now, but he doesn't completely change the matchup. So he's kind of a hit and miss as far as his viability with Rey. And a lot of Rey's viability still comes from herself, which again is going to be very different for a lot of the other characters that we're going to see here, where it's not just one or two counters on each side, but it's going to be a slew of them. I guess the other thing that is probably really cool that we didn't mention yet is I think this is just going to completely destroy C. A 4-turn healing immunity, unless they want to take in 5 characters with C and get really bad banners. That's that's also an option. But even then, Force Diet kind of messes with the instant defeat stuff, and there's probably a way that C can work around that. But again, similar to Starkiller, while it might be doable, you're making things a lot harder for your opponent than they really are. So again, not a negative review. It's just that the other characters, I think, do more for their teams. Next up is going to be Maul himself. And actually, I won't lie. I was a little tied between whether we should have done Maul or Malgus for third and fourth. I think this is the closest where the characters have very, very similar value. And you could probably even word this in a way that Maul is really fourth or second best rather than third. But Maul, he brings a lot of viability. Mostly, I think, where his most value is really on the Mandalorian team. I know that when you get to the very end game and you have all the characters, or at least most of the teams out there, yeah, you're going to want to put him with Vader because you're trying to make good quality teams rather than a large amount of teams. But what he does for the Mandalorian faction is really absurd. I mean, Bo-Katan is their best leader before you get Maul. And even then, the team is very mediocre. They're a cleanup team, or they beat like low-level C teams with Bo-Katan. You put Maul in here, and the team has a very specific set of synergy, meaning that can be beaten by quite a few teams, but on defense, it'll hold against a ton, and also just have a wide variety of things on offense it can beat. It can even challenge a lot of Galactic Legends, given you have the modding, and the enemy comp is also the right comp, and you have everything lined up right with turn order and stuff like that. So Maul, again, he really revolutionized this. He does more, and he does more for Lord Vader, and he does more for Mandalorians than, say, Ben will do for Rey or Ben will do for JTR. So that's ultimately what it comes down to, is where is most of his value. I think the reason why we put him this low on the list, or at least below Malgus, is because Mandalorians are a little bit more out of the way than, I guess, Sith Empires. That may not be true. If you feel differently, let me know in the comments. I'm a little between there, just because I guess you get Jango and Bo from JMK if you go that route, but like Armor and Canderous are a little out there. I mean, you can totally avoid Canderous for Malik if you want to. You can go the Juhani route, which is also acceptable. But next up is going to be Malgus himself, and I think this is really where the characters start to legitimately change matches. Like, yes, Maul and Swolo, they can turn your win into a loss and vice versa, whether you have them or not. But I think the ones that are more apparent right now are really going to be the last two, and that's going to be Malgus. What Malgus currently does for the Sith Empire team, it's quite honestly magnificent. He even has viability outside of GAC to challenge JML, especially when he has his Datacron. So very similar thing to that Maul is doing, where he's able to beat Galactic Legends specific comps. Darth Malgus, even outside of GAC, it has a shot at doing that. And what he does for the Sith Empire in general, it's really balanced. Like, I gotta give props to CG on this one. They made Darth Revan more powerful than he was before, distinctly powerful than he was before. There are certain counters that worked before, specifically, I think, bounty hunters and troopers that were on, kind of the cheaper end of things to be able to beat him. But now he comes in, and he's still actually beatable by a lot of things. We faced one last match in 5v5, and we were able to undersize with SLKR. So it's still, like, that's not a great trade for me. I have to use the Galactic Legend to take him down, but we were able to undersize it, and it wasn't risky at all. So there is a lot of balance with this character. I think the deciding factor coming back to Maul between the two of them, of which one is more valuable for you and for your roster, is really which team you have built up. I know there are a lot of people, the way that they're building the roster, and this isn't wrong, but this is something that needs to be addressed, they're just completely ignoring the Revans. And if that's something you're doing, you don't like them, you don't have any issue, and that's fine. But I would take that into consideration and really probably prioritize Maul. Like, if you have JMK and you have half the Maul team built up anyways, he's probably a team that you're going to want to go after. And I mean, this isn't really even relevant today because Malgus isn't even in Proving Grounds. Maul just got added. But again, when we're talking about building a roster long-term, this video isn't really just meant to be for today. It's meant to be built for long-term. And coming into the number one for characters is going to be Ahsoka. Ahsoka, just broken kit, man. Immediate annihilate off the first turn, assuming you're using her with the JMK. 50% offense, crit damage, health, and defense to the entire team is very broken. And then even on top of that, the amount of tags they gave her, cool, but also, like, why? Like, Scoundrel? This is a huge faction. This is the ginormous faction. Not only can you put her on teams, Scoundrel teams, but you can put her on other, like, random teams like Rey that can also utilize Scoundrels, and you can just make super broken things. So she has a ton of places she can go, whether you have JMK or if you don't. But what she does for JMK, and I think Padme, I believe, is significantly ahead of what, say, Maul will do for Lord Vader or what Ben will do for Rey. She's able to lift JMK. JMK is good, but he goes from, or at least, and this is changing a little bit now, especially with Jabba, but what JMK would beat or would hold against on defense without Cat and would hold against with it Cat is significantly different. He becomes challenging for every Galactic Legend to beat with Cat, and without Cat, Gas and Bad Batch Show, they're really just handing JMK over into the corner. So great character, and again, more versatile than the rest too. You can make kind of the argument that Maul has 2 homes. Malgus really has one. I guess you can kind of throw him on a C team as a tank. That's not bad. He's immune to like max health damage, so that's very helpful in that regard. JTR or Swallow's really, I think, the most limited. He only has 2 teams. Maul has 2 teams. But when you go into Lady Tano or Cat here, it's a lot. Like, yeah, she's ideally on JMK, but she'll work with Padme. She'll work with Bam. She'll work with Rey. She'll work with Dash. I've even used her with JTR and TB because of the synergy that she can have with unaligned Force users. So, yeah, she takes the cake as far as characters go. And I should mention this, and I didn't include them together because it just depends on what type of roster you're trying to build. But in my opinion, I believe the ships are probably the most important, particularly Razor Crest. If you can go early, you can get a hold of ships, you can get Razor Crest, you can get Executor. A lot of times it doesn't matter what your JMK is or isn't able to do. If you can get the Executor, put it on defense, you get a team that no one can beat, again, depending on what division you're in and whatnot. That's more valuable than your JMK going from beating SLKR to beating, say, I think, what's a really challenging one for him? I guess maybe some comps of JML, or a JMK Mirror is probably the best comparison to make for him. And then even the TIE Prototype probably isn't more important than Cap, but she's probably more important than the rest. Like, so if you had to rank Razor Crest, Tano, and then TIE Interceptor, and then Malgus and the rest, but just revolutionizes what the Empire is able to beat. Really good at solid counter against Negotiator. Continues to beat Rebels. I don't know if that was a problem before, and really it's one of the things that gives them the biggest shot against Profundity, which isn't complete right now. We still need a lot more data as Profundity is very new. But that being said, that is going to be the list. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what some challenges are, and not just necessarily getting the character, but getting the character's team, because that's really half the battle. I know a lot of people this time were looking at Swollen and being like, oh, he looks cool and all, but I don't even have JTR unlocked. I have 5 million GPU. Why should I bother? So things like that sometimes a little blind to. So let us know what you guys think in the comments. And until next time, stay awesome.